And then I just went through the, going through the purchase agreement. I jotted down some language that I thought might be relevant in certain instances as it relates to things that maybe as the seller you would want to counter out, or at least things that you would want to make your seller aware of in the event that, uh, you know, there was a clause or something in the purchase agreement that was giving you some pause or trepidation. So, with all that said, I think what I'd like to start with, because we're going to get we're going to get some panelists, I think for next week, and we were going to do it this week, and then time just kind of ran out. But so we're going to get 3 or 4 people that are, going to talk, kind of talk about what they're seeing and what have you. But I think kind of leading up to that, what I'd like to do before we kind of get into a bunch more about these, because we've obviously trained on each of these documents and they are there are other recordings of each of these trainings, correct, Justine? And those recordings are on the intranet, and there are YouTube videos of them or whatever. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. I've sent them out, and then they're also in the Good Life Grow Room, the YouTube page.
Good. So I think what would maybe be helpful is to, and we can get into talking about the purchase agreement again in a more intimate way, and certainly talking about the ancillary documents. But what I'd like to start with is maybe some feedback as to problems that you're seeing out there and concerns that you're seeing out there. I know Jennifer Waxberg had a good one. I'm trying to remember what it is because I didn't write it down, but I'm going to call her. She had a really good thought. She doesn't have to be on the call, I don't think. But at any rate, as we get this feedback, we're trying to write it all down so we can prepare ourselves for best practices moving forward. So with that said, I'd love to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly about how you're navigating these waters. I think it'd be helpful for us to get some feedback before we dive into some of this stuff, because we'd like to hear what's going on in practice on the street. So does anybody have any thoughts they want to share? Don't be shy. Come on, somebody's got to have something. We need something to work through. We got to give us a case study. What's a problem? Somebody's had to have a problem. There's 43 of you on this call. Somebody's had a problem with something at some point, right? No problem.
Yeah, feel free just to unmute yourself, or if you're having trouble, put it in the chat and I can help unmute you.
It's just euphoria out there, huh? No problems. I can't believe it. Just everybody's just making millions of dollars and it's all working out. Jay, I haven't used it yet. Okay. So how many of you haven't used it? Okay. And for anybody, how many of you have used it? Okay. And so we've got kind of a mix, maybe half and half, so to speak. If we're not going to get any comments on that, let's talk a little bit about the document that we haven't discussed, which is the best practices document that was emailed out. And essentially what this was kind of a response to things as a practitioner that I saw in the new purchase agreement that kind of made me a little bit concerned that we're giving up ground as a seller. So these are coming from a seller's perspective. So as I've indicated to you previously, a purchase agreement is obviously written to the benefit of the author. So it's what we refer to as an adhesion contract. So everything in the purchase agreement is intended to protect the purchaser. That's by the very nature of the way an agreement like that is drafted, which is a tad counterintuitive to us because we're obviously dealing with it in a uniform capacity. So people kind of say, well, why is it so skewed? Well, that's just the way adhesion contracts are drafted for the purposes of to the benefit of the author. And so because of that, we obviously have to be sensitive to the fact that we're not only representing purchasers, we're representing sellers. So what provisions could give us, consternation or concern, specifically as it relates to the previous purchase agreement and then this purchase agreement? So some of the things that we've talked about previously, and the first one, by the way, does not have to do with necessarily a change in the purchase agreement, but it's just something that we were seeing in the marketplace that had started to become a problem. And that's when buyers were suggesting their cash, and then all of a sudden there's 16 offers and you think you've got cash, and so you're excited about that because theoretically that seems to be a more formidable offer. Historically, that's the impression that we get, right? Cash is cash, although sometimes it's not. And that's why we talk about, you need to vet it. You need to see the bank statements, even a letter from the bank. I even think, and this maybe is overreach for some people, that that average balance has been there consistently, because you can have a business owner who can show 150 grand one day in their account and the next day they have 10 cents, depending on what's going on. So you need to really think about how these cash offers are coming in and what you're doing to vet them, to make sure that they are truly what they say they are from the standpoint. So the provision that I drafted is to try to not only make sure that the cash purchaser is going to do what they say they were going to do and not try to switch to financing like bait and switch so their offer will get accepted, but also set some requirements that the seller can indeed ask the purchaser to provide them with documentation throughout the process as to make sure that the money's going to be there on closing day. And because in a lot of instances, frankly, a financed offer in certain circumstances can actually be probably a more formidable offer than a cash offer, depending on the circumstances of the cash offer. So there's kind of two fundamental components. Is the person that's making offer sincere and going to do what they say they're going to do? And secondly, is their offer truly, powerful in the sense that you have a strong understanding that they're going to have the money there to close? So it just says this: in the event the purchaser has indicated that they're paying cash, they hereby waive their right to finance a property and agree to waive any financing contingency and agree to perform under the cash terms stipulated in the purchase agreement in accordance with paragraph 8 and more specifically section 8.1. The provision shall be deemed material to the seller's decision to accept the purchaser's offer. Furthermore, the purchaser shall provide proof of funds to demonstrate their ability to close the transaction. Up until the closing, seller may request updated proof of funds in their reasonable discretion. So if you've got 18 offers and somebody's trying to pull a fast one on you, and you're concerned about that, which we're seeing more and more. So we're seeing a lot of offers come over, and we're seeing people try to switch their financing in the middle. And then I get these calls, right? People are like, well, can they do that? And my position is, of course, none of these things ever get litigated because they don't, or generally don't go to binding arbitration because they're not of enough, merit financially for that, for the juice to be worth the squeeze. But my position is, and I have substantiated this with legal counsel, is that in the event that there's a term in the contract that is of consequence. So, for example, they're saying cash, they're clicking the box cash versus financing. If there's a term that is material and it's in the contract and it's stipulated in the contract and somebody tries to change that, then they're in breach of contract. So my position is that you can't switch it. But in order to be, kind of belt and suspenders, as we say, this is a provision, if your people are concerned about it, that you could counter with. Do I think you should counter with this every time you get a cash offer? Not necessarily. But these are supposed to be tools for you to utilize in the event that it's appropriate, excuse me, in any given circumstance, not necessarily, to utilize it every single time. So just some thoughts for you. And even if you don't use these provisions, which in some cases you may not, it affords you the opportunity to be thinking about what you need to communicate with your seller and let them decide at the end of the day what their tolerance is for risk. So it looks like we have a ton of stuff in the chat. Let's see what.
Hey, Tom, it's Peter. I just wanted to mention something about that cash offer stuff.
Sure.
So a lot of times we see that that they say it's going to be cash, and then later they want to finance it. And what they say, of course, is that if they're not able to obtain financing, that they would pay cash. So that's what I think people have to understand is that, and I don't, whether you're agreeable to that or not is up to you and your seller. But that's what we're seeing a lot is everybody says they're cash, but then they go to their financial guy and the financial guy says, no, it's not a good idea to put 300 grand. I mean, just let's try to get it financed. Then they schedule the appraisal and we say, what's going on? And you say, oh, well, we're going to finance it, but it's still cash if we can't get it financed. So I thought I'd just mention that to see what your comment is on that.
Yeah, no, and I think it's fair. So one thing that I haven't put in here that, probably should. So again, if you get past you could put something as simple as this, that they're waiving their financing contingency. And that if you get past the inspection period and they don't close on or before the closing date, or let's say reasonably within 5 business days of the closing date, that their earnest deposit is non-refundable. And you could even require that the earnest deposit be larger or more than non-refundable if they don't perform, shall be immediately paid to the seller. So if you think about it in that context, there's 2 things here. Do they have the cash? And if they do want to finance, fine. The earnest deposit should be raised, in my opinion, in that instance. It'd be better to get it done at the onset. And then it should be made non-refundable as a function of the financing contingency. And I would go on to say, if you're past the inspection contingency period, I wouldn't say that it's limited to them dropping their financing. I would say if the closing does not occur due to no fault of the seller, which is different, right? So if they have some weird circumstance that they don't want to close for whatever reason, and it's not financing related, but it's really not the seller's fault, then they should, then that's language that's actually stronger. Now, if there's a title defect or something, that would fall under the guise of non-performance from the seller, in my opinion. But it's a fair point that you're making, Peter, that it does make good sense financially for people to have leverage in this situation, because theoretically, if the stock market's doing 11% historically, and you're borrowing your money for 2.5%, that's pretty simple math, right? Makes sense to utilize those funds differently. And I'm not suggesting that that's not a strong strategy. What I am suggesting is that it's breach of contract, because there's materiality in the fact that they said they were cash, and in many instances they're outperforming 16 other offers, and that might be a consideration. So if you're going to make the accommodation and let them do it, you should get something for it, in my opinion, from the standpoint of that exposure. Is that fair, Pete?
Yeah, and the only reason I mention it is that you might see it as a seller, after the inspection comes or whenever, where somebody says they're going to actually do a loan, but it's backed by cash. We've heard that several times, and sometimes the seller agreed and sometimes the seller said, no, you're paying cash. But I just think that the only reason I mention it is that it might come up in discussions, in negotiations. So
No, I think it's a great point, and I appreciate you saying it. What else do we have in the chat there, Justine? You mind managing the chat a bit?
Yeah, you bet. So I was kind of looking through here. People are just commenting if they've used the purchase or the addendums and purchase agreement yet. Mark Gorup, he went ahead and said he only wrote one, and oh wait, hold on a second. Okay, skipping that one. Colleen Bloomquist made a comment that the inspection addendum was tough. Colleen, I don't know if you want to expand on that or give some comments about it.
I was just writing an offer, and as I was going through the inspection addendum, I thought it was just confusing. It was a lot in it. So I was thinking if a list agent would take a look at my purchase contract and see that, they would go, oh, move on, just because there's so much in it. That was just my thought.
Yeah, it's a fair point. So here's what you need to know about that document. That document, and I think the part that's confusing, and it is confusing, and we probably need to smith the language. We've tried to work on it, and we probably need to work on it more. But here's what you have to know. You don't have to check any of the boxes changing the dates. So on the second page of the authorization to obtain inspections, if you want to stick with what the purchase agreement says, you can stick with what the purchase agreement says on those dates. You can simply check the boxes for the items that pertain to it. If you'll notice, there's a check mark by each of those items, and that's just to try to expedite the time frame, to try to make your offer that much stronger, or if you're the seller, to try to limit the time frame. And the reason is, if you guys recall, is that they said that you have 14 days to, which many people have pointed out is not necessarily different than 10 business days, by the way, but you have 14 days to respond. But the big thing is that if you spend those 14 days, or you get a response within 3 days, let's say the purchaser provides a response within 3 days, well, then the seller has still till the 18th day to respond. So you don't have to utilize that. If you think it's not in the interest of your client, you don't have to change those dates. Those dates were put in there more for the purposes of the seller to shorten up the period, and then the buyer to get a response in a reasonable amount of time, which I think the agreement doesn't do a good job of. So that was the mindset.
Okay. Okay, yep, and I made notes of all that, Tom, just so if you and Leslie want to reassess at all. But let's see here. Sheila had mentioned or asked, she's curious for those that have had a listing and asked for the authorization to obtain inspection form to be completed and submitted with an offer. Did anyone have any pushback? So if anyone has anything to say on that, please feel free to unmute yourself and give your experience. And Sheila, I don't know if you've had any particular experience that you wanted to share or that made you ask that particular.
I just saw in a couple of the listings by our agents that they had requested it, and I was just curious if agents were going ahead and doing that, or whether they felt like they wanted to stick with kind of the open-ended, we can do what we want in those 14 days. Just a curiosity question.
I had a listing this week, and I emailed that document over to the agent prior to us accepting their contract and had it pre-filled out, so we knew that we were shortening the inspection period.
Jennifer, what did you tell me yesterday that I've already forgot that was so important? You had already said something and I forgot what it was.
Mine was about the paragraph 26. When I went to amend it, then it turned my offer into a counter offer. So I wanted to put the verbiage of 26 on my listings in the associated docs as a separate addendum, so that they came over already signed from the buyer side of it, with the disclosures and the wire fraud and everything else. Because when I was so that was my learning curve this week.
Thank you. So I want to speak to that. God, I'm so appreciative that you're on this call, because I was kicking myself because I couldn't remember what it was. So just to clarify, so what happened is that Jennifer sent over, or excuse me, Jennifer got an offer, and holy mackerel, that needs to stop. So Jennifer got an offer and she wanted to change paragraph 26. So I'll give you the short version of what we're saying. It says, as it relates to paragraph 26 of the purchase agreement, in the event the property endures damage post-purchase agreement execution but prior to closing, purchaser and seller shall work in good faith to reach mutual agreement about potential repairs or replacement to the property. In the event the purchaser and seller cannot come to terms, either party may cancel the purchase agreement in their sole discretion. So as many of you may recall, or we'll start at kind of 100,000 feet on this. As many of you may recall, paragraph 26, in my estimation, is very punitive to the seller in that it affords the purchaser the right to engage a contractor and or an insurance adjuster. And basically the way the wording is, I'm paraphrasing, but basically what they say goes. And the seller is obligated to make those repairs and presumably eat their deductible and not have any remuneration as a result of that. So the terms of the agreement would stay the same, but they would have an obligation. So they would have the purchaser would unilaterally be able to place that requirement on the seller, is the way 26 reads. I think fundamentally that 26 is flawed in the sense that it provides that the seller, is obligated to do something that they have no idea what that something could be. So it's a blank check, so to speak, as we used to say. So what Jennifer is saying more specifically is, if she put the inspection up and checked it out and said, this is what my person's amenable to, this is how many days we want on the list from the standpoint of the inspection period, these are the inspections that we'll accept or not accept, and oh, by the way, and she sends that over and they send that with the purchase agreement, but then and she loves it, right? It's 25,000 over, it's that dreaded cash, but they have $1 million in the bank and it's a $250,000 house and everything is wonderful. It's a utopia of real estate from the standpoint of accepting the offer. And she just wants her seller to sign off on it. She can't do that because she has to counter, if her seller is so inclined, she wants to counter paragraph 26. So her point is that if that's going to be a requirement that the seller is going to require of the purchaser, that she's going to put that documentation in the associated docs and make it a suggestion as an inclusion in their offer. We can't require that they do anything, right? They're able to submit any offer. They could submit $1, right? We can't say what they can do, but we're just saying this is what the seller, this is a request of the seller to try to provide the purchaser with the best level of guidance as to what will motivate the seller. So does that make sense? Does anybody have any comment on that? Does that clarify her concern and issue?
Can I speak? Am I unmuted? It's Sarah. You can't
Sure.
see me. So I'm glad I chimed in right at 26 because it's my biggest concern with the purchase contract. What if we're on the buyer side? Like, is there a way to coach our clients of like just eliminating 26 altogether, or writing in something that the seller and the buyer would agree on? What are we going to lose offers for our buyers by keeping 26 in there and not having some strategic way of addressing that?
Well, if you could even put the language in paragraph 10 that's in the short version, and it says, as it relates to paragraph 26 of the purchase agreement, in the event that property endures damage post-purchase agreement execution, but prior to closing, purchase seller shall work in good faith to reach mutual agreement about potential repairs or replacement of the property. In the event the purchaser and seller cannot come to terms, either party may cancel the purchase agreement in their sole discretion. So that way the seller's not on the hook. So you could certainly put that as a term if your buyer was amenable to it. I think it's a terrible overreach. I don't know what those guys were thinking when they were drafting it. I mean, it's crazy to think that a contractor could dictate, what if you had some small amount of dimpling on some window frames, on some exterior clad window frames on a lake house or something, and you had $50,000 or $60,000 worth of windows, and the insurance claim is denied, but the contractor thinks that those should be improved, and they have a vested interest in that, right? Because they're going to be the ones selling the windows, and your seller's supposed to just accept that because some contractor says it's appropriate for those windows to be replaced. I mean, it's the most ludicrous provision in a contract that I can remember in some time. And I would love to hear, there must be some rationalization for it because they put it in there. I would love to hear why I'm wrong, because it just seems so ridiculous to me. But I'd love to hear some feedback on it. Maybe I'm not thinking about it correctly because it just seems so ridiculous to me. I don't know how anybody could think it was appropriate.
Well, or definitely saying like in the event that this would actually take place, that the seller and the buyers would mutually agree upon the parties evaluating the property, or something along there. I had to write a purchase contract the other day, and this was the first time I was going through this, and I was crunched on time, and I even said to the listing agent, I was like, I haven't, let me know how you want to address 26, because I didn't really know at the time how I should write that.
Right.
Because I just don't want to lose offers because of that. And I just wondered if anyone else has written a contract with it and has done anything with it or removed it or what they've done.
Anybody have any thoughts on this? I'd love to get feedback on this. If you don't want to say it, you can put it in the chat. Either way.
I mean,
Even
if
if you
I'm on the seller side, I'm definitely watching this 26. Like, I definitely will advise my sellers to, modify this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a real problem. I mean, we're going to really try to lobby people to change it.
Yeah, that's
Patrick asked if we could strike 26 in its entirety. And you could put in paragraph 10 that paragraph 26 is not a part of the purchase agreement. The problem with that, I think, is that then if the purchase agreement is silent on that topic, then what happens? I think I'd almost rather define the course of action than be silent on it. Because if you're silent on it, then what happens? Then it's a he said, she's, you've got, if the contract doesn't communicate anything on it whatsoever, that I don't think is favorable either.
No, I don't like 26. Just even having to explain it, like, it's not, it's awful.
Yeah. So Raquel says my mic isn't working, but yes, 26 is a concern. You can't negotiate what you don't know about, which is my whole premise. And it's unreasonable to ask parties to agree to something that they don't know what it is I think what she said, which is totally right. So my concern is twofold. It's a blank check, which is not prudent business strategy, in my opinion, ever. And the second thing is that the parties that get to make the decision are parties that benefit from certain behaviors, and that to me is wholly inappropriate. So I've beat this drum enough. I would not strike it in its entirety, in my opinion, because I think if you do that, then the purchase agreement is silent on it, and I don't think that's a favorable circumstance because it opens yourself up to conjecture or interpretation. I think you should define it in the simplest way possible. I have a long version, which was a rant late at night, more probably so than terminology, and then we shortened it up. But it really doesn't matter what you say specifically. It just matters that the concept is addressed. It just matters that you're cognizant about, hey, what are we going to do in the event that this materializes, and what's the expectation? And I think from a market perspective, it's going to take us a while to work through how the market's responding to it, how buyers and sellers are reacting to it. I mean, I hate to say this because it sounds elitist or obnoxious or arrogant, but a lot of people on the buy side, believe it or not, I think there's a lot of agents, excuse me, that are listing properties that won't have a clue that it's in there because they won't read it.
So
They
that's
don't go
my
to
question also, and sorry to, I'm not meaning to interrupt. Has
Yeah.
anyone on here recently had, I haven't had a seller since the new contract was introduced that's gone into multiple. If anyone's been in that position, have they seen both contracts or have they seen this contract? Because that worries me. If like you're up against another offer and they're not using this contract, are they just going to favor going back to the original contract?
Jennifer Waxberg, you want to comment on that? It's a great point, Sarah. Jennifer, are you there? Waxberg? Maybe not. Okay, well, it's a great point. I know, Sarah, that Jennifer did have multiple offers, and it's a fair consideration. And I suppose if the seller requests that you use the other contract, then you should. I think every major company, from what I understand, is requiring it of their agents. So that's at least what I understand to be true. Maybe that's untrue, or maybe people aren't following it, but my understanding is Dodge is using it. My understanding is Berkshire Hathaway is using it. And my understanding is Nebraska Realty is using it. And we're using it. So that right there is 75% of the offers that you're going to get, theoretically. So I would be curious, though, has anybody gotten offers from other agents, or excuse me, other companies that are the major companies that are using the original or the former contract? Pete, can you speak to that?
Hey, Tom, sorry, I'm here. I was just eating lunch. Yeah, we have had multiple offers, and I think almost all of them were the new contract. I think we got 12 offers on a house, and all of them were the new contract, and none of them mentioned this. And I'm with you. I think 72% of agents never read the contract, and you can. So I and we're only a few days in, so and there's no houses out there. So I'm just thinking that it's going to be a slow. It's going to be slow to tell who has the issues with this. I'm concerned. Jen and I are so concerned that we're losing house. I mean, I wrote an offer all cash, close whenever you want, and still lost. So 10 grand over, still lost. We're just concerned, even with the inspection addendum, using the inspection addendum, we're concerned. We just want to keep our head down and get, the three rules are get the house, and get the house. So, you know what I mean? We're just concerned that, yes, that's terrible verbiage, and why you would ever agree to something that hasn't happened yet is terrible. But we also know that I think it's going to be it's going to be, and really anybody's going to be agreeable to that. Any reasonable person is going to be agreeable to that. But you know how it is. You submit these offers and you call the agent and you try to detail exactly what the offer is, and it might be a newer agent, and you're trying to be very clear. Hey, this is what we're doing here, and I just want to make sure we're terribly reasonable people. We love puppies. We're great. So saying, hey, let's strike out 26. Jen and I won't be doing that. I mean, we're gonna.
But don't you? But Pete, wouldn't it be the opposite though? Wouldn't the seller appreciate that you were striking 26 out? Because it's actually more punitive to the seller.
Tom, if I could talk directly to the seller, then you're right. But remember, I'm talking to a representative of the sellers, and the telephone game sometimes doesn't communicate well. So,
Pete, your position is is that, which is probably a pretty smart position, although it's a little counterintuitive. Your position is that the agent is, some of the agents that are going to be receiving these offers, not to be disparaging, but just being practical, are going to be so uneducated as it what it relates to the paragraph 26 that they might think it's to their detriment, even though it's potentially to their seller's benefit. And anything that muddies the waters just makes it harder to win the offer because they get kind of out of whack, or their brain gets all over the place when they have 10 or 12 offers and you don't even know that they'll understand it or articulate it correctly. Is that your point?
I'm not to say that they wouldn't understand it or articulate. I'm sure they would. The biggest point is the muddying of the water. I mean, you know as well as I do, we are trying to write the cleanest offers we've ever written in the history of it, real estate. And so you just want to keep your head down and hopefully be that one that, again, I think we press the board. I think we press, we work together to say, hey, there's just no reason it needs to be written like this. There really isn't any reason it needs to be written like this. And again, maybe we're not seeing something, but I've read it over several times and there just really isn't. I just don't know what they're mitigating against. Like, what are they? So anyway, I just
can I interject? I got my mic working. Pete, you're like spot on. Jerry and I have read the contract. Like, I bet we have 4 or 5 hours between all the meetings and the videos just going over the contract. And I do think 26 is a concern, more so on the seller than it is the buyer. Because obviously if there's a problem and the seller's agreeing to fix it, why does the buyer care? But we had a situation earlier last year that I really think that it needed to be negotiated, and we could not have foreseen it. It's just, stuff happens. And I think you're absolutely right. You guys, whoever said it, you cannot agree to do something that you don't know what it is until it's happening. That's not protecting anybody. That's just causing, I feel like there's some things in this contract in general that really need to be questioned on what the reasoning behind why it's written the way it is. Because if we keep countering everything in and out and adding all of these addendums, so it's like what Pete said, you're just muddying up the waters. And I think that it's making it so confusing that as a listing agent getting multiple contracts, I am going to be throwing out those contracts to the side and dealing with the ones that are as clean as possible, which may or may not be the right ones for those buyers. But what I'm doing is, what I'm doing best for my client. And I think that there's a lot of wording in some of these paragraphs, especially 26. They're just, there's no reason for it to be totally one-sided.
And I agree wholeheartedly with both of you. And I also agree that it's a concern that, that the detail of some of these things may intimidate people and may concern them when there's multiple offers, and may confuse them and may confuse their sellers. And I also agree that the best approach is to, lobby for language changes. I would love it if people would email the board, email the president, Doug, and say, hey, we have a fundamental problem with paragraph 26. We think it's not in best interest of the industry. Go for it. And we have every intention. There'll be a board meeting this month. And just so some of you that I've indicated this in previous conversations, but we have just gotten the large brokerage designation. So we have just been afforded the opportunity to sit on those executive board meetings. Prior to that, all the companies that don't collectively have 5% of the agents across Omaha and Lincoln don't get to a seat at the table. They have a representative that represents smaller or mid-sized brokerages. So we didn't get a seat at the table for this, and sadly, or I would have been more forceful. But yeah, we do now, and so we will continue to try to work towards getting changes made. And I agree, Pete, with you and Raquel, that that's the best way to do this, because having a bunch of addendums and a bunch of ancillary documents, trust me, I take no joy in that, because it just makes my life more difficult. But I understand, and I think that is the approach. So I think hopefully these are near-term fixes. And again, none of this is boilerplate. And when I say best practices in parentheses, these are things that should be discussed with your buyers and sellers. These are not things that should be mandated at every turn. It's like everything. You have to use discretion. You have to be discerning. You have to understand. You have to educate your buyers and sellers, and then you have to follow their lead based on what their level of comfort is for certain risks. And it's just like you can have one person that would never think of waiving an inspection. You can have another person that would never think of having one. So, it depends on the threshold for risk. I think the key is that we have to be articulating the benefits, the costs, and educating our buyers and sellers on the risks and the rewards, and let them ultimately make their decision. But I think to let paragraph 26 just go as a seller and have no conversation and say, hey, here you go, it's in dot loop, click here, click here, click here, it's going to just be fine, we're never going to have another hailstorm, is fundamentally malpractice in my opinion. So that's all I'm saying. So I don't want anybody to take these provisions in the literal sense that, hey, you plug and play at every pass, because that's just not realistic. Sometimes you're going to employ some of them to make your offer stronger from a buyer's perspective. Sometimes you're going to employ them as a listing agent to try to make bring some clarity and uniformity to the offers that are coming in. Those are some of the thoughts. There's something else in the chat here. Could we come up with a list of changes that need to address and either have us as agents some kind of petition and advocate? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So maybe what we could do is maybe we could see if we can generate, clearly 26 is a problem. I would actually like them to reference, I mean, I don't know why, and I think it's coming, but I don't know why they don't have the inspection, authorization to obtain inspections, why that document isn't part of the uniform agreement, and that it is known that there's a uniform authorization to obtain inspections and services document that will accompany the agreement. Now, that wouldn't per se have the specifics on shortening the calendar days like we have in page 2, but it would at least bring some uniformity to thought as it relates to what people's kind of normal expectations are regarding inspections. So
that's how it used to, that before the last contract,
correct.
You were doing inspections, you just looked for the inspection addendum. And then the last contract, they added in the verbiage into the contract, which, was neither here nor there. It was just one less addendum, but.
Correct. And in Lincoln, they've always had this addendum. So they never went away from it. So that language that they adopted, that's kind of that due diligence period versus inspection, that language is not dissimilar to the former Lincoln contract prior to this merger of the MLSs and Lincoln and Omaha. And this document, something that's similar to what we have derived, was in there, similar to what you have alluded to, Raquel, which was the document prior to when it became part of the purchase agreement. So I don't know how they rolled this out with not having, and again, I know it looks like I'm piling on and that I'm not a good steward of our relationship with the board, and I'm not trying to be that way. We want to be part of the process and we want to be part of the solution, but I owe you guys honesty in regard to my interpretation of that. I mean, that's my job. So I'm not trying to be difficult for difficulty's sake, but I do think that when things are not appropriate and we have collective thought on it, we have to rise up and make those steps professionally, fairly, appropriately, but we've got to make, so I think that's a good idea. I think we'll develop some things that we think are fundamentally flawed And then we'll see how many people we can get to buy in on that, and we'll formally submit something to the board. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
So
and
we'll work on that.
I think the good thing too is like you said, I think it's good to, instead of people just, excuse my language, but instead of people just bitching at the board, come up with what the verbiage should be, or at least point out what the flaw is and how it should be addressed. And I think if there's enough people that understand the contract as a whole, not just 26 is a problem or the inspection's a problem, or, I mean, there's a couple other things on here. You know, these are items that we as a brokerage have addressed, and these are the agents that are on board. And I think that, and maybe even get Berkshire and the other, you know, NP Dodge on board so that we go to, because at the end of the day, the board works for us. You know, without us, there is no board. So they need to listen to us.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And we're dues paying members, and we're paying a lot of them. And I think that Berkshire has problems with these things too, because I know why they do, because I've talked to Scott about it, and he's indicated that they have some issues with certain things. And I think at the end of the day, we just have to continue to petition for better language. It doesn't even have to be our language specifically. It's more concept than it is specific language. It doesn't have to be our language. It could be whatever language, but I think there needs to be, if you're going to have a uniform purchase agreement, the whole idea of having a uniform purchase agreement is that people are going to be more competent in the utilization of it, and there's going to be less opportunities for error and misunderstanding. That's the whole premise behind the uniform purchase agreement. So if you have clauses that are, by their very nature, obscure and or leave interpretation, or can be confrontational in some manner, you've destroyed the very intent of the uniformity of the purchase agreement. So it's counterintuitive to me, but it kind of is what it is. So I like the idea of consolidating our thoughts. I think it's a very good recommendation. Consolidating our collective thoughts, and as individual members of the board, signing on to that pledge or that petition. I think that's wise. So we'll do it. Why not? I mean, I think it makes sense. So we'll work on that. Hopefully in the next week we can get that figured out. So, one of the things too that Don Grimshaw pointed out, I thought was very smart, and I don't have a solution for it yet, because she thought, well, we can put it in the we can put it in the response, or we can put in the authorization, but I think it might be too late. But that's number 4, and it says, as it relates to the inspection contingency in paragraph 18 of the purchase agreement, purchasers shall either accept the property in its current condition or terminate the contract. Purchasers shall require no repairs of the seller. So that's basically that whole old A or C thing. So it basically says, hey, which I've always argued is a stupid thing personally, because the fact of the matter is the seller doesn't have to make any repairs. So you could put B, in the old form, you could put B and it didn't matter, right? Because if you put B and the seller says, I'm not doing any repairs, you're in the same position you were before. And as far as A or C, well, as you guys all know, if a buyer's way down the road on the thing and the seller's way down the road, and they say, well, hey, if you don't mitigate this radon, we're out, then they're, oh, wait a minute, because it's not worth $850 to put the thing back on the market. So then they're going to be agreeable to it. So I'm always amazed that listing agents actually fall for that, but I guess it works once in a while. So that's the reason for that thought process. But I've always been dumbfounded when people write, on listings that I've had, and they say, well, we'll pick A or C. I'm like, well, so what? I mean, how does that change the price of tea in China? It just doesn't, because you can always afford it as a seller to reject the buyer's request. And frankly, you can always go back as the buyer and verbally say, well, we're going to have to check C, sorry. And then the seller goes, oh, wait a minute. What do you want? And, oh, well, we want this. So it's $400 or something. Well, okay. and then they mark B, and then you're right back where you started. So I don't know, but anyway, apparently people wanted that, so that should resolve that. So you could put that in paragraph 10 if you're so inclined.
Yeah,
Let's
Tom, it's
see.
Peter.
Yeah.
I think it's just too early right now. I think that one, many people haven't read that the seller is actually obligated to do work that hasn't even, and two, with so many people, most of the time, you're telling the seller, leave the keys on the counter and get out. That's basically what these offers are saying. Here's the price, get out. So we're in a market right now where everybody wants to keep their head down, and so 18 of the 19 offers don't get accepted anyway. So but no, I think that if you brought it to the board, I think they would be very reasonable in removing that verbiage. I just don't know why anybody would keep it in. It doesn't, like you said about A and C, they were never required. You know what I mean? And I have had a buyer do the whole, hey, the roof is leaking. You can't let the roof leak for another 28 days. So you got to fix the roof leak, even though we said no repairs. So, or they went back to that section, I think it was 26 in the old contract that said, you have to keep it in good working order, that type of thing. So I do like this contract in that a lot of it says that whether the buyer or seller want to leave, either one can leave, because that's really what it has always been. It's about, how bad does the buyer want to buy the house? And I always tell people it's not done till closing. And there isn't very many times when a judge is going to force someone to buy a home. So it is all a negotiation. But I just don't think there was a lot of thought in 26 when they decided how to write that. Let's put it that way.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. So as it relates to the purchase agreement and any of the ancillary documents, are there any other thoughts? I kind of wanted to make this more of an open forum so people could voice their concerns or their thoughts or any ideas that they have. We've done several trainings, obviously, on the documents. So I wanted to kind of get feedback as to what those are. Just to reiterate, all the trainings we've had on the documents as it relates to the purchase agreement and the supporting documents are all recorded, and they're in the library. So you can source those at your convenience in the event that you want to hear what people had to say about certain things. For that reason, I don't want to be terribly redundant and go through these things over and over, because I think it wastes the people's time that have already listened to it. I'm more interested in how we can kind of start at a different point each time and see where people are at with it. So is there some, and there's no pride of authorship here. I agree that we've been clunky too on this. We haven't been perfect. So I want to hear your feedback as to what you think needs to change or what we can do better as a company to present this to the market and help our buyers and sellers win. We're open to anything. We need you guys as great practitioners to provide us with feedback, so we're mirroring what you think will allow you to be the most successful. I'm happy to. There is nothing that's off the table. There is nobody that's voice is any more important than the other. We work for you guys. This is your company. You're the ones who make it rain every day. So it's up to you. As long as it's legal and ethical and it makes sense, we're all ears. So let's have a dialogue. What is it about the agreement that keeps you up at night? What do you think we haven't addressed? What do you think we've gone too far on? I'm open. It's not, nobody's going to get upset or angry if somebody has a different idea. It's totally fair.
Tom, I have a question.
Sure.
This is Patrick. So basically, and maybe it's not much of a question, I'm looking for more feedback. I have a listing coming up, and we were going through section 26 as it pertains to the purchase agreement. And essentially, my client was questioning the integrity of the entire process if we have these allowances in a purchase agreement. And he's suggesting, well, why are we even taking any of these contracts if they have that? And he's asking me to preemptively strike that. That's kind of why I asked that earlier in the chat, is if we could strike it. If our client's asking us to strike that, I mean, what do I tell that client?
Yeah, great point. So what I would tell them is, hey, the problem with striking it is that then the contract does not speak to it. I think it's better to define it. So what I would say to my client, if they said, hey, I just want to strike 26, what I would say is, because let's just say the thing went to mediation. What you don't want is somebody saying, well, you got rid of this paragraph and you had damage to the property and you're the one who got rid of the paragraph. So what do you propose should happen now that your document's silent on it? And you don't want it to be interpreted against you because you were the one that struck it. So I think what is better practice is to define it. And you can define it very simply by saying, hey, everybody, as it relates to paragraph 26, here's how it works. If in the event that the property is materially damaged, we have to agree to what, after the purchase agreement has been signed, but prior to closing, and you can define it further if you want to go on and say wind, hail, all those things, you can. But I would just say if it's materially damaged and that the purchaser and seller have to agree how that's remedied. Plain and simple. That seems reasonable to me. But if you're silent on it, then what does happen? Does that make sense, Patrick?
I think it's easy just to keep that verbiage as simple as you said it, without making it super confusing to people or detrimental to us losing an offer.
Does that make sense and thank you for that, Sarah. Does that make sense to you, Patrick?
Yeah, I get it, but this gentleman's adamantly upset about the fact that's even included in the contract, and he doesn't want it to get, as we talk about, muddied by adding other language. You're saying just define that after we receive offers?
Yeah, but certainly a seller can
Tom,
can counter language. I mean,
I think the key word, Patrick, is it's just negotiate.
Sure.
If something comes up, like if an unforeseen event comes up, a hail damage, storm, a tree falls on the house, whatever, we will negotiate on how that is to be handled, to be repaired. I mean, obviously, if the roof is damaged, you're not going to be getting the loan. So obviously the seller is going to want to have the new roof put on. And then how is that going to happen? But at the end of the day, if something were to happen that neither party cares about, then the seller shouldn't have to fix it. And so I think the simple word is you just want to be able to have the opportunity to negotiate and come to terms, agree to terms. And obviously, if you can't agree, then the buyer should be able to walk away if it's significant damage. But
so basically,
and the other thing about it too, excuse me, Patrick, and then I'll let you talk. The other thing about the way the provision is written is that it requires, unless the repair is, as I understand it, unless the repair is over 5% of the value of the house, it requires the purchaser to accept that. And that's pretty arbitrary and capricious in its nature, because what happens if there's not potentially like-kind material, or there could be a dispute whether it's like-kind material. So it does put some onus on the purchaser in that regard as well, in the event they can't agree. So I don't like terms that are defined without understanding circumstances, because regardless of whether the buyer or the seller, it doesn't make sense to me to have a conversation about something that we don't know has occurred and define how we're going to have that conversation. So with that, Patrick, what did you want to say?
No, I take that point. So basically, my option here, what I should be telling my client is, we're going to either request that language, the short version, number 5 there, will be included in any purchase offer, in any offer, or if they refuse to do that, we have to counter that language in. Is that correct?
That's the way I would address it.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. Thank you.
Personally.
I got it.
It's not perfect, guys. It's clunky as hell. I get it. I'm not feeling good about where the industry is the Omaha industry is collectively on this. I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's a real problem. Because it's never going to be a problem until it is, right? Like these things never come up and then they do. I mean, I know the house that Raquel's referring to, and it was a major problem. And you know, I think that this particular language would have been, to potentially could have been greatly to the detriment of the seller in those circumstances. So I don't know. I just think I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm not trying to be a know-it-all or we're right and everybody's wrong. I'm not saying any of those things, but it does concern me. And I just don't want us to get sideways with our buyers or sellers or have them be hurt in any way. Buyer by not getting the house that they maybe would have gotten if the language was more reasonable, and seller agreeing to something that could be terribly punitive to them financially. And by the way, might even be something that they couldn't perform on even if they wanted to, because the financial implications of it were so punitive, assuming that they couldn't get the adjuster to buy a roof or to buy the windows or whatever. I mean, think about you could be breach of contract and fundamentally not have the resources to achieve the deductible in some instances, but maybe even greater to actually do the repairs. To me, that's terribly irresponsible to put a potential seller in that position. That's just my opinion.
Hey, Tom, can I bring up just a couple of housekeeping things?
Sure.
If we're going to send something to the board, maybe just make a note that paragraph 7, talking about receipt of earnest money. A lot of times today, we're not taking the check like we used to, especially with people being able to online pay. Instead of saying, to be delivered later, and if it's to be delivered later, see section 10. If most of us are not getting the check, can we maybe have them put some verbiage in there that just has a check mark, says, to be delivered later, and to fill in the, to be received within 2 days of acceptance, or however we normally write it. Like I usually put in there, earnest money to be received within 1 business day or 2 business days of, accepted contract, instead of just constantly filling in paragraph 10. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it says, okay, so delivered with this agreement to be delivered later. If delivered later, see section 10. But you can check to be delivered within blank hours of this final acceptance of this agreement. Now, admittedly, it's poorly worded, and it's the third one. But the third one does afford you the opportunity to put something in there. I think it should say days, not hours, but.
Yeah, I just put, I guess you could put 24 hours or whatever you put. Okay, I'll just mark that, but then I don't have to put anything in section 10.
No, then theoretically, only the second one refers to section 10, but it is clunky as hell. All of it.
Okay.
Okay, and then the earnest deposit payable to the escrow agent. Well, if it's going to be wired, or that should be suitable then.
Yeah, that would be the escrow agent then, correct?
Correct.
Been putting, okay.
Yeah, so I think, albeit a bit clunky, I think it kind of works. I agree with you. If it says to be delivered later, see section 10. Well,
I know the earnest deposit is really a touchy spot with the commission, and that people have gotten in some big trouble for not having those turned in right or commented correctly.
Right. So, I will tell you this, I would never personally, I think you're just opening yourself up to potential liability. I would always make the earnest deposit payable to the escrow agent, in my opinion. I mean, there fundamentally isn't really a benefit unless I would love that. Let's have some debate. I want somebody to tell me how dumb I am. I know I'm not very smart, so I wish somebody would tell me that I'm wrong on something here soon, because I'm beginning to think people are just being too polite. But I don't see any reason why one would ever accept an earnest deposit if you're afforded the opportunity to send it directly to the escrow.
They're the ones that are ultimately going to be holding it, so why wouldn't you just write it directly to them?
I don't know why you wouldn't, and I can guarantee you, our accounting people, they would love you for it if you did. If you don't send, I mean, there's companies that have always really wanted it because they wanted their trust accounts and all that. I just don't see the benefit. I I don't see how it benefits. I think there's more harm in earnest deposits going to the purchaser's company, and then it goes to the seller's company, and then the seller's turns it on over to the. I mean, to me, it doesn't make any sense. But certainly you're afforded that right, and we're not mandating that you don't do it that way if that's the way you've done it. But I personally don't see the benefit of it.
Yeah. Couple other quick housekeeping things. Paragraph 14. It no longer says that the VA, if you're doing a VA loan, it no longer says the escrow is paid by the seller. As far as I know, that's still the case. So I'm concerned why that's not in there, why they took that out. Because they still disclose that the state dock tax is paid by the seller, which is never paid by the buyer. So I've always thought that was an odd thing to have in there. But yeah, 14, they took out the fact that the escrow is paid by the seller if it's a VA loan. And then
Okay.
if it is a VA loan, is there no broker admin fee? There's just no broker fee, right, on VA?
Correct.
Nobody else pays for that. Okay. And then I had, what was my other one? Oh, my other one was if you go to paragraph 15 and you waive the survey and the lender does not require it, and you do inspections, paragraph 18.1 says that you have the right to perform inspections, including a survey. If you change your mind, the waiving would negate that, correct?
Well, and I don't like that provision because I think it contradicts itself.
Yeah.
So that's why in the
people change their mind, 2 days
well,
after.
that's why we put in the inspection authorization addendum. It says this addendum shall not affect the provision and completion of a home warranty or wood destroying insect inspection if such has been checked at section 16 and 17 of the agreement respectively, and the language of those sections shall remain unaltered by this addendum. So we try to better clarify that in the inspection authorization to obtain inspections, because you're right, it's contradictory. And the honest answer is your guess is as good as mine how that would be interpreted, Raquel, because they're in conflict, and they're in conflict in the exact same document. So theoretically, if it was somebody put a gun to my head, I agree with you that if they checked, that they didn't want it, then theoretically that would be material, and somebody should be making a decision based on that. But I think that's why it's important if the inspection services agreement is signed, then that would better define that so they're not in conflict. So there's no misunderstanding, because theoretically the inspection authorization services agreement would control
that. Okay. And then the last thing is, if we're going to send something to the board, names for deed, I'd love to have them. If we're going to have check marks, just, have the check mark for joint tenants, JT, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Just have them add that in there as an option for the deed, just again, clearing it up.
I agree with that.
The only other thing that I'm surprised it's not in here, and I'm surprised it's not on our seller disclosure as well, is HOA fees, the amount, and if it's due monthly. It's in the MLS, but it's not listed anywhere for a buyer to sign off, other than, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I do mostly older homes, we don't have HOAs. But the only place that I can see, other than where the realtor puts in the information in the MLS, is on a buyer's cost sheet. So if it's not in the contract, it's not on the seller disclosure, it would be.
So paragraph 23, Raquel.
Yeah.
Homeowners Association and protective covenants. It says purchasers acknowledge that property may be subject to protective covenants that govern purchasers' use of the property, and they may be enforced by a homeowners association or its members. Purchaser can obtain a copy of the protective covenants. Seller shall pay all homeowners and neighborhood association assessments levied and due at closing. Homeowners or neighborhood association dues shall be prorated to the date of closing. Purchaser be responsible for all future homeowners and neighborhood association dues. Now, I agree with you that I think that it's bad that it doesn't. I think there should be more detail on that.
they should, I just think as a buyer, because some of these HOA dues, like if you go down to like J-Loft, there's $600 a month for the HOAs. And that can really make or break somebody if they aren't paying attention. Like Pete was saying earlier, I do think there's a lot of agents out there that, are just flying by the seat of their pants. And somebody said it a while back, even a monkey can sell real estate right now, but closing, it's a whole nother deal. And it doesn't come up a whole lot, but I am really surprised that at some point we don't disclose what the amount is other than just the cost sheet. So it's just something to like throw in there.
I think it's a fair point. I think it's
We disclose
material.
the broker fee, we disclose all these other little fees. So I don't know, just throwing it out there.
No, it's a fair point. I think it's smart.
Yeah, that's all I've got without.
Hey, Raquel.
Yeah.
There is a separate document in .loop for HOA.
Just for the.
Yep,
the
that
amount?
talks about all the fees.
What's it called?
It's a separate addendum.
So why can't we just put that in the contract though again? Because all I'm looking for is to say, hey, we're disclosing that the amount is $140 per month.
Because generally when I've done a condo or something with an HOA, sometimes you have to get that information from the HOA, which occurs after you have the contract.
But I guess my concern is that like with J-Loft, my people are not buying it for other reasons, but that would have, their payment, it would have changed their payment like grossly.
Sure.
And we don't know that until after the contract's accepted, then it looks, it looks bad all the way around.
So I think to Trace's point, I think that it's difficult for the purchaser to have the onus on the purchaser to anticipate what that amount is. So I'm not disagreeing with your point, Raquel. I think it's a very astute point. Where I think it would be more appropriate is to make it not only, which I think it is, but more than a required field in the MLS, but to protect the public, it should be part of the seller property condition disclosure statement mandated by the state, because it's material to the transaction and they should have to divulge the amount. And I agree with that. And I think that that's 100, or at a minimum, they should have to provide the bylaws that suggest what the amount is, and any information as it relates to those bylaws, and anything that's because you're supposed to put anything that's material as it relates to notices that you've received. So arguably you could say, knowing what the price is to the HOA is notice, but I think you're right. I think there should be something in the seller property condition disclosure statement that identifies what the actual per annum and or monthly cost is of the HOA in its current form at the point of the execution of that agreement, of that document.
Yeah, because I feel like we have to have them sign off on the SID form, that 99% of the people don't have a clue what that means or what they would ever do with it. So it's just something that I've always been baffled that it's not disclosed up front. And so anyway, just throwing it out there. If
It's a good point. No, I think it's right.
Yeah, Jen and I always said that you should have to put the monthly due or whatever, even the yearly due, as well as the average utilities on the disclosure, because that's the person that would probably know best, even if it wasn't approximate for the utilities. And I know that's easy to get, but those two things, I definitely agree with Raquel that I don't care if it's $90 a month, it makes a difference to people. So, that's, yeah. Anyway, I think that would be best on the disclosure, because they're sitting there doing their homework on the disclosure at that time anyway, and it's a good point.
Tom, if they would have just come to us in the first place, we wouldn't be having these discussions. Just let us rule the world. It would be just so much better.
I know, right?
I just can't wait till we're like that big, huge brokerage that everybody hates.
Well, maybe we'll just
That's
be
a
the
joke.
ones
That's a
everybody
joke,
hates.
Tom. That's a joke, Tom. And Tom, I felt really small when you said a fourth grader with a crayon could sell a house.
When did I say that?
I think I'm pretty sure I had you quoted saying that. That was before you said it, but it's another thing to get it to close.
I think that was the last meeting, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure it was Raquel. Raquel, see, Raquel and I heard.
We listened to you,
Well,
Tom. We listened.
yeah, that's unfortunate for both of you. I'm sorry about all that. I'm sorry for all the past comments that you've had to endure, and for all the ill-advised future comments that will no doubtedly come out of my mouth. So just that's a blanket apology to everybody. So, all right, well, what time is it? It is 12:47. Okay, anything else that anybody thinks is important to discuss about the purchase agreement? Anything that makes people feel uncomfortable, that they don't understand? Is there any provision? And don't, you can certainly call privately, but don't feel, if you don't understand something, it probably means that a lot of other people don't. So there's no bad questions or positions here. This is intended to be collaborative. We're intended to have different opinions, and I think dissension is great. So there's something that you think we should be doing differently, or there's something you don't understand, or you think is we've interpreted incorrectly. What does anybody have? Okay. Okay, so we'll report back when we get this petition thing going. If anything makes sense to somebody that we haven't included, please feel free to submit anything that you have an opinion about, and we'll try to take it up. Trying to think of anything else that might be valuable at this point. I don't know what it would be specifically. So I'm appreciative of everybody's time. Thank you so much for continuing to engage. I think it's really valuable. Thanks for all the input and the thoughts. I thought there was a lot of great ideas. And as we continue, we'll have these sessions weekly or maybe every other week, depending on how time goes here. But anything that in practice seems like it's a problem, please let us know, because you guys are in the trenches and we want to know, what's going on, and making sure that everybody has a voice. So it's a democracy here. We're all have a seat at the table. So we want to make sure that we're giving you what you need. And that's very important to us, that everybody feels like they have a voice. Everybody should be valued. So you are all valued, and I want you to know that. So I appreciate all of you. Proud of you. We'll talk about it at the sales meeting, but another over 50% growth month on month. January was 47.5 million on 31.5 million last year. Unbelievable growth. You're doing great things. I know it's hard out there with the lack of inventory, but be aggressive, keep plugging away, go the extra mile. Real estate, effort equals reward. So that's the good news. So thanks, guys. Appreciate all of you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks.